Burns just did a documentary called Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies. And he interviewed a young friend of mine. Her segment got cut out, unfortunately, but it's in the internet version. And this is a young woman of 20 who's had a very serious bout of cancer that keeps coming back. And she's been at Johns Hopkins, then goes back to college, then she flares up again. She's a beautiful young woman, and here is what she said. Cancer has made me more adventurous and spontaneous. You begin to wonder, how can that be? But that is really what she said and what she feels. So a lot of it is about attitude. And there was somebody said, it's not about your genes, it's about your sunny attitude. If you can stay positive when all about you, things are falling apart, that makes a difference. And I will tell you a personal story. My husband died when I was in the hospital having emergency surgery. And that in itself was pretty horrible, but the surgery they did on my back, it really wasn't necessary, it was really my hip. So I was in a nursing home for about 2 months during the time of my husband's death. Now, you won't believe it when I tell you that it was really a good experience. I actually made up my mind that I was not a pathetic person. This is horrible when it happened, but I was not pathetic. I was not a victim, and I was not going to be undone by this. And it really worked. I really talked to myself, and I had a lot of support, and I made up my mind, no, there's something good that's going to come out of this. And I guess it really convinced me that a lot of the things that I talk about attitude, that really we can influence ourselves and we can talk to ourselves. So attitude, I think, is extremely important, and it's something, and by the way, I didn't know I was resilient before this happened, and I didn't know I could make myself have a sunny attitude. So I think we don't know what's inside of us. There's a lot more there that we can do than we know. The second part of your psychological portfolio is purpose. Why do you get up in the morning? Everybody in this room, just observing the singing and the talking and the enthusiasm, you all have a purpose. And that's what keeps you going. But you also work with a lot of older people, some of whom have kind of given up. They no longer know why they're here, what's their purpose. And that's, it seems to me, one of our jobs is to help people renew their purpose, find a new purpose. You cannot force somebody to get a purpose. You can't say, get yourself a purpose. But our job is to help people get passionate about something that they want to do that gives meaning in their life. I'll never forget, I interviewed literally hundreds of people and ran focus groups for the 2 retirement books that I wrote. And I'll never forget, I interviewed people at a mobile home, mobile park, and then I interviewed some CEOs of Fortune 100 companies. And I was so surprised. The people in the mobile park said that their life was wonderful. They never expected to have 2 homes. So now they had a mobile home, and they had their home back where they lived. We have to remember, though, that these people had pensions, and that's probably a thing of the past. But they could afford to be at the mobile home park. And as one man said, I can go fishing when I want, and my wife can go to the mall when she wants. That same week, I interviewed a man who was the CEO of a Fortune 100 company. He had a pension of $1 million. He was not poor. And so money was absolutely no issue. And he said to me, my life is hollow. I said, what do you mean? He said, this is solid. My life is hollow. He no longer had a purpose. And I interviewed a woman who was the mayor of a small town in Colorado, and she no longer was mayor, and she said, I've lost my purpose. And so when you lose your purpose, you've lost a great deal. There was an article, I don't know if you read Tara Parker Pope, but she writes articles on aging in the New York Times. And she said, forget your New Year's resolution. It should be to get a purpose. That's your New Year's resolution. And I interviewed somebody who said to me, you know, I used to help companies develop their planning, strategic planning, and I don't have a strategic plan for myself. So what can you do, both for yourself, to make sure that with each transition you continue with a purpose and with the people with whom you work? Well, I found it helpful to talk with people about a variety of paths that they might follow. And I'll just quickly mention them. You can, some people I found, as life goes on, are what I call continuers. They are continuing with the same purpose and the same mission they had, but in a modified form. I'm a continuer. I'm no longer a professor. I don't have to mark papers. I'm not on committee meetings. But my purpose is the same as it's always been. It right now is to translate what I know in psychology and from my research so that it is accessible to the everyday person. So I'm a continuer. There are adventurers. I'll tell you the story of one. These are people who say, I am so bored with my life and what I've been doing. I want to do something new. I don't mean by adventure. I noticed that a lot of your staff, one of the words you used was adventurer. So a lot of you are adventurers. I'm not talking about climbing a mountain. I'm talking about doing something new. I interviewed a man who lost his job. He was the head of a research group, part of Congress. They did the research and would bring studies back to Congress. He was in his late 50s, and they decided to do away with that division as this money saving, for money saving. So he didn't know what to do. You know the Joe Hill song, I'm sure your singer knows it, too young to die, too old to work. It's a wonderful folk song. There are a lot of wonderful folk songs, but that's a particularly good one. So he didn't know what to do. He loved sailing. He took a trip by himself in a sailboat and came back and knew what he wanted to do. Now, this is a guy who was the head of a research group. He dressed in a suit with a tie, and he had a briefcase. You got the picture. And he came to announce to his wife that he was going to go and get trained and become a massage therapist. It's not what you're thinking. And because he remembered many years before, his first wife had died, and he was upset, and he had some massage therapy, and it made him feel better. Well, he did go to school. He did become a massage therapist, and he really made a difference. I wrote about him in my first book. His wife wrote to me about 3 years after the book was published and said, I couldn't read your book until now because I knew that you wrote about my husband. But I want to tell you, I am so proud of him that he did what he wanted to do. and what made a difference to him, even though it didn't fit with what my friends thought was appropriate for somebody to do. I'm just going to put a little aside here. Dan Levinson, we all know his work, Seasons of a Man's Life, but one of the things he talks about is that in a marriage, if you're sabotaging your partner's dream, that's not good for a marriage. And this wife did not sabotage her husband's dream to become a massage therapist. He since died, but not because he became a massage therapist. So you can do something different, whatever it is. Searcher. We are all going to have to search a number of times in our life. When we don't know where we're at, we start to search. Easy gliders. These are the people that don't want a purpose, that just want to let each day unfold. There was one man, he was an investigative reporter for AP, and he said to me, I'm given at the office, I just want to be involved with sloth. I said, what? I knew it, and I knew that that didn't make sense. He said, no, I don't want a purpose anymore. So there are easy gliders. Involved spectators, people who are no longer doing, but they're watching. The art curator, who's not a curator, but he's still involved with art. And then the only negative one is the retreater. And that's the person we gotta watch out for. Sometimes it's good to retreat and just take a moratorium. But often, when you see it leading to being a couch potato and depression, you want to help them get a new purpose. So purpose is important. Attitude, purpose, and relationships. Everybody talks about social capital. And I guess this is why many people move into the communities that you run, because they want to be part of a community. They need that social capital that we all do need. I was at just a get-together in the building I live, in the condominium, and I met a new woman. She was, to me, very young, and she was a fairly new widow. And she said, I said, well, has it been easy for you getting involved in Sarasota? She said, well, I read in the paper, I didn't know this. She said, about a group for singles, 55 and older. And it's based on a model, I don't know where the first one was, and they go on trips together, they go to museums. And so in a very short time, she's gone from being a widow who moved to Sarasota and didn't know anybody to somebody who is now part of a large social group and is making more intimate friends in that group. And it happened, and this is a new organization in Sarasota. This shows how important what we all do is. We can organize the environment to make it good for people. So if we can keep a sunny attitude, a positive attitude, still being realistic about losses, not denying some of the negatives about aging, but adopt a positive attitude, keep renewing our purpose, and making sure that as we lose relationships, we gain others. We don't sit back and moan and cry. We get involved. Now, what's the bottom line of all this? Let's say we do all these things, but how do we know it's working? And it's working if you feel you matter. And let me tell you about my relationship with mattering. At Maryland, I love being a faculty member at Maryland. I was a very happy faculty member. And I had wonderful colleagues. And I met a man there, Morris Rosenberg, who was a very esteemed sociologist. He too has died. That is one of the negatives. I don't know if he died quickly or not, but at any rate, he wrote a paper. an academic paper and on teenage delinquency, boys and delinquency. And after all the analysis of all these studies, he said it's not self-concept that makes a difference, because all adolescent self-concepts, they go up and down and up and down. It is if they feel they matter, if they feel appreciated, if they feel noticed, if they feel depended upon, if they feel important. And he had a final sentence, a throwaway sentence, and he said, I bet in old age, those people who feel sidelined and irrelevant and as if they don't matter, those are the people, they need help. And part of our system is to sideline older people, sideline people with certain disabilities. We do that not to be mean, but it's just part of the culture. There's a great deal of ageism. We have it about, but that's a horrible speech. At any rate, so I really got interested in this whole issue of mattering. And this is really what a university is about. I gathered some students, and together we worked with Rosenberg and his students. Now, he was studying mattering and of homeless people, and we were studying mattering and adult learners. And he was studying generalized mattering, and I felt that I don't want to ask somebody if they feel they matter and they say no. It's pretty devastating. But if you focus it on one arena of your life, do you feel you matter to the institution where you're studying? And we developed mattering scales. And we found the obvious. Those students who felt they mattered to the university, and then it was done at community colleges and all over, those students who felt they mattered stayed in school. And those students who felt they did not matter, that faculty were not available to them, that nobody was paying attention to them, those people dropped out. And so you can apply that to your own setting. Are there any people in your setting who do not feel they matter? Are there some people who are not the ones? What happens to the unpopular person in a community? I know people say to me, when they live in retirement communities, they get together for a drink and then they go to dinner. What about the person who's not invited for a drink? What about the person who falls through the cracks, who doesn't feel he or she matters? So, as a result of being aware of Dr. Rosenberg and his work, I found mattering to be really central as I began to think and to conceptualize how do you develop programs where people can feel they matter. And that's one of the conceptual frameworks of the book on retirement that I wrote. So, is there a mattering recipe? Is there something that you can do to make sure you matter? I think so. You can be very intentional and stay engaged. You gotta stay engaged. It doesn't have to be with something really important, but you just got to be engaged so you don't become a retreater. And you also can make other people feel they matter. I know somebody who received a memo from his deputy. He called her in, the deputy, and said, "This is a wonderful memo and you're doing wonderful things. Were there other people involved?" And she said, yes, and she named about 5 other people. And so this person said, you can take this memo back and rewrite it, and just put everybody in who had a part in it. Make them feel they matter. I want to have time for questions, so I'm going to end on one last story. And I don't know if this is a true story, but I use it. And so it was in the Houston paper. I got it out of the newspaper, so it's got to be true, right? Well, here's the story. Itzhak Perlman was playing an important concert, and at the end, one of his strings broke, and there was a gas, and he nodded to the conductors that continued. And he kept playing with one missing string, and at the end, he said, "You don't have to have all the strings to play. You play with what you have." And I think that's a really good lesson for us all. If a string breaks, keep playing, modify, try something different. And I think that people like Ted Kennedy and Itzhak Perlman are inspirational for all of us. So now I would love to hear some questions that you have. I think somebody's got a